There is a parking lot in Indianapolis where ghosts still dance. If you stand there today, on the corner where Indiana Avenue meets the echoes of a forgotten empire, you will see nothing but cracked asphalt and weeds pushing through concrete. But close your eyes. Listen. And you might hear them still. The saxophone wailing at 2 a.m, the laughter spilling from doorways, the clink of glasses raised in celebration by travelers who had driven hundreds of miles just to find a place where they could rest their heads without fear. This is the story of the Attucks Hotel, Indiana's lost palace for Black America, a place where legends slept, where dreams were born, and where an entire community built something magnificent from nothing. And this is the story of how it was erased from history. To understand what the Attucks Hotel meant, you first have to understand what it meant to be Black and traveling in America during the first half of the 20th century. Imagine this. You are a successful businessman, a doctor, a musician on tour. You have money in your pocket and destinations to reach. But the moment you step outside the borders of your own neighborhood, you enter a world designed to remind you that your money, your education, your talent, none of it matters. You are not welcome here. The signs were everywhere. No colored allowed. Whites only. We reserve the right to refuse service. These were not just words painted on windows. They were promises. Promises of humiliation. Promises of danger. In sundown towns scattered across Indiana and beyond, the threat was even more explicit. Black travelers knew that being caught after dark in the wrong town could mean arrest, assault, or worse. So what did you do? Where did you go when every hotel locked its doors to you? When every restaurant turned you away? When exhaustion pulled at your bones and night was falling, and your children were crying in the back seat, and you had nowhere safe to lay your head? This was the question that haunted Black travelers for generations. And it was the question that gave rise to one of the most remarkable institutions in American history, the Black Hotel. And nowhere was this institution more vital, more vibrant, more necessary than along Indiana Avenue in Indianapolis. Indiana Avenue. Even the name carries weight. One of the 4 original diagonal streets laid out when Indianapolis was founded in 1821, this stretch of road would become the beating heart of Black Indianapolis. The Harlem of the Midwest, they called it, and for good reason. The story begins in the years after the Civil War, when newly freed Black Americans began streaming northward in search of opportunity. Indianapolis, with its railroad connections and manufacturing jobs, drew thousands. By 1900, the city's Black population had grown from a few hundred to more than 15,000 souls, and most of them settled in and around Indiana Avenue. The land itself had once been considered undesirable. Swampy terrain near the Central Canal and White River. But Black families made it home. They built churches, schools, businesses. They created a world within a world, a city within a city, because the larger city had made clear they were not truly welcome anywhere else. By the 1920s, Indiana Avenue was thriving. Black-owned barbershops and beauty parlors lined the streets. Doctors and lawyers hung their shingles. The Indianapolis Recorder, the city's Black newspaper, chronicled the community's triumphs and struggles. And at night, the avenue came alive with music that would change America forever. The jazz clubs of Indiana Avenue became legendary. The Sunset Terrace, George's Bar, Henry's Cafe Lounge, the Cotton Club, Dee's Paradise Ballroom. More than 30 jazz venues packed into just a few city blocks. On any given night, you might find Duke Ellington on one stage and Count Basie on another. Ella Fitzgerald's voice floating through open windows. Cab Calloway bringing the house down. Dinah Washington making grown men weep. But Indiana Avenue did not just host the giants. It created them. This was the proving ground where local musicians cut their teeth. Wes Montgomery, who would become one of the most influential jazz guitarists in history, played his first professional gigs here. J.J. Johnson, the trombonist who would revolutionize bebop, learned his craft on these stages. Freddie Hubbard, whose trumpet would soar on countless classic albums, was discovered in these smoke-filled rooms. The Hampton sisters harmonized on these street corners before taking their act to the world. And presiding over all of it, like a queen watching over her domain, stood the Madam Walker Building. Completed in 1927, this magnificent four-story structure was a testament to what Black enterprise could achieve. Designed in African Art Deco style, with Egyptian sphinxes and African motifs adorning its walls, it housed the corporate headquarters of Madam C.J. Walker's hair care empire. The woman herself had died 8 years before its completion, but her daughter Eulalia had seen the vision through. The Walker Building was more than architecture. It was a statement. Here was proof that Black Americans could build their own institutions, their own economy, their own world. The 1,500-seat Walker Theater hosted movie premieres and vaudeville shows. The casino ballroom upstairs shook with the footsteps of dancers. In the basement, the Missile Room became an after-hours jazz club where musicians jammed until dawn. Wes Montgomery himself was discovered there, his guitar singing in the small hours when the rest of the city slept. But for all the magnificence of the Walker Building, Indiana Avenue still lacked something essential. A first-class hotel, a place where Black travelers could find not just a bed for the night, but dignity, respect, the kind of service that white Americans took for granted at hotels across the country. The kind of service that was systematically denied to people of color, no matter how much money they carried or how famous they had become. The need was desperate. When Duke Ellington came to Indianapolis to perform, where did he sleep? When Ella Fitzgerald finished her set at the Sunset Terrace, where did she rest? For years, the answer was often the same. Guest houses, private homes, rooms rented from sympathetic families. The indignity of it was staggering. Here were the greatest artists in America, treated like refugees in their own country. The guest house system was a remarkable example of community solidarity, but it was also a constant reminder of exclusion. Families opened their homes to strangers because they understood the terror of being stranded. They fed traveling musicians home-cooked meals because restaurants would not serve them. They provided a human network of safety in a nation that offered none. The Negro Motorist Green Book, first published in 1936, became the Bible of Black travel. This modest publication listed every hotel, restaurant, barbershop, and gas station in America, where Black travelers could expect service without humiliation. It was, in essence, a survival guide. And Indianapolis had its share of listings. The Ferguson Hotel on Capitol Avenue, the Hawaii Hotel on Indiana Avenue, the Senate Avenue YMCA. Guest houses scattered throughout the community, but a guest house is not a hotel. A converted home is not a destination. What Indiana Avenue needed was something that would match the ambition of its jazz clubs and the grandeur of the Walker Building. A hotel that would say to the world, "We belong here. We have built something magnificent. We will not be denied." And so the community dreamed of the Attucks Hotel. Named for Crispus Attucks, the Black man who was the first to die in the American Revolution, the hotel would carry the weight of that sacrifice into the present. It would be a palace for the people who had been told they deserved nothing. A beacon for travelers who had been cast into darkness. The vision was grand. A modern hotel with elegant rooms and impeccable service. A restaurant where traveling businessmen could close deals over fine meals. A ballroom where community events could unfold in style. Barbershop and beauty parlor services. Meeting rooms for civic organizations. Everything that white hotels offered to white guests. Finally available to Black Americans in the heart of their own community. Building such a hotel required more than vision. It required capital. And in a community that had been systematically excluded from traditional banking and investment, raising that capital meant turning inward. Black entrepreneurs pooled their resources. Community members bought shares. Churches invested their building funds. It was a collective act of faith in themselves and in each other. The hotel that emerged from this collective effort was everything the community had dreamed. Located on Indiana Avenue, it stood as proof of what could be accomplished when people refused to accept the limitations placed upon them. The Attucks Hotel opened its doors to a community hungry for dignity, and dignity is what it delivered. The guest rooms were clean and comfortable, appointed with care that reflected the pride of ownership. The staff treated every guest with respect, regardless of whether they arrived in a chauffeur-driven car or a dusty jalopy held together with prayer. The restaurant served meals that satisfied not just hunger but homesickness. Travelers who had eaten road food for days found themselves sitting down to real home cooking. Fried chicken that crackled with perfection. Greens simmered with ham hocks. Cornbread that melted on the tongue. But the Attucks Hotel was more than a place to sleep and eat. It was a gathering place, a community center, a safe harbor in a hostile world. Business meetings happened in its lobby. Romances bloomed in its ballroom. Politicians made speeches. Activists plotted strategy. The hotel became woven into the fabric of Black Indianapolis in ways that transcended mere commerce. And the visitors told the story of an era. Every major Black entertainer who played Indiana Avenue eventually passed through those doors. Musicians checking in after late-night sets, actors resting between performances, athletes seeking sanctuary. The hotel's guest book, if it still existed, would read like a who's who of Black achievement in mid-century America. The staff remembered them all, the quiet dignity of certain guests who spoke softly and tipped generously, the loud laughter of others who turned the lobby into an impromptu party, the weary travelers who simply wanted a hot bath and a clean bed after driving through hostile territory, the young performers arriving in Indianapolis for the first time, eyes wide at the magnificence of Indiana Avenue, the veterans who had seen it all and still found something special about this particular stretch of road. For the children growing up nearby, the Attucks Hotel represented possibility. Here was proof that Black people could build beautiful things, that they could run successful businesses, that they could create spaces of dignity and grace. The hotel taught lessons that no classroom could convey. You are worthy of fine things. You deserve respect. Your community can achieve greatness. The 1940s and 50s were the golden years. World War II had brought prosperity to Indianapolis, and Black workers found employment in the factories that churned out war materiel. After the war, the GI Bill sent some Black veterans to college, creating a growing professional class. Indiana Avenue hummed with possibility. The jazz clubs were packed every night. The Walker Theater showed first-run films. The Attucks Hotel stood at the center of it all, a symbol of everything the community had built. These were years when you could walk the length of Indiana Avenue and feel like you were in the greatest neighborhood in America. Neon signs blazed above the clubs. Music poured from every doorway. Well-dressed couples strolled the sidewalks on Saturday nights. Children played on front porches while their parents socialized on the steps. The barbershops buzzed with conversation about sports and politics and neighborhood gossip. The beauty parlors were temples of transformation where women emerged feeling like queens. The Attucks Hotel anchored this world. It gave travelers a reason to come and stay. It gave locals a place to celebrate weddings and host receptions. It gave the community a physical manifestation of its collective aspirations. When you walked through those doors, you walked into a space where Black Americans were not just tolerated, but celebrated, where excellence was the expectation and dignity was the floor. But even in these golden years, forces were gathering that would soon tear it all apart. The very success of the civil rights movement would paradoxically contribute to the destruction of Indiana Avenue. And urban renewal, that terrible euphemism for urban removal, was already being plotted in city planning offices. The bulldozers were coming, and nothing in their path would survive. The first blow came not from enemies, but from friends. The passage of civil rights legislation in the 1960s opened doors that had long been closed. For the first time, black travelers could legally check into white hotels. Black diners could eat at white restaurants. The integration that generations had fought for was finally arriving. But integration came at a cost that few had anticipated. When the doors of white establishments opened, black customers walked through them. And why wouldn't they? After decades of exclusion, the opportunity to stay at a downtown hotel or eat at a fancy restaurant represented justice finally served. But every black customer who chose a newly integrated establishment was a customer lost to Indiana Avenue. The math was brutal. The Attucks Hotel had survived because it was necessary. When black travelers had no other options, they came to Indiana Avenue. When necessity disappeared, so did many customers. The guest rooms began to empty. The restaurant tables sat vacant more often. The revenue that had sustained the hotel through decades of discrimination began to dry up just as discrimination itself was ending. This was the cruel irony at the heart of integration. The very walls that had imprisoned black Americans in their own communities had also protected the businesses within those walls. When the walls came down, the protection vanished. Black-owned hotels across America faced the same crisis. The establishments listed in the Green Book, the places that had provided safety and dignity for generations, began closing one by one. But integration was not the only force destroying Indiana Avenue. Something even more devastating was coming. Something with no redemption attached. Something that would not just take customers, but erase entire neighborhoods from existence. Urban renewal. The planners in City Hall had maps spread across their tables. They drew lines with cold precision, marking areas for clearance. Slum clearance, they called it. Blight removal. Urban renewal. The language was sterile, clinical, divorced from the human reality of what those lines represented. Homes where families had lived for generations. Churches where babies had been baptized and grandparents buried. Businesses built from nothing by entrepreneurs who had overcome impossible odds. All of it marked for demolition. Indiana Avenue sat directly in the crosshairs. The same swampy land that had been dismissed as undesirable in the 1800s was now valuable real estate. The expanding medical campus of Indiana University needed room to grow. The interstate highway system needed right-of-way. And the neighborhoods that had made Indiana Avenue the Harlem of the Midwest? They were in the way. The federal government provided the funding. The city provided the bulldozers. And the black community, which had built something remarkable against all odds, watched helplessly as that remarkable thing was torn apart piece by piece. The process was relentless. Entire blocks disappeared overnight. Families received notices that their homes had been condemned. Businesses that had served the community for decades were told to relocate, as if 50 years of goodwill and customer relationships could simply be moved to a new address. The social fabric that had held Indiana Avenue together began to unravel. The hotels were among the first casualties. Without the surrounding community, without the jazz clubs that drew visitors, without the residential population that provided customers, they could not survive. The Attucks Hotel, which had stood as a beacon of possibility, found itself marooned in a sea of rubble. The blocks around it were being cleared. The customers were scattering to new neighborhoods. The future that had once seemed so bright was darkening by the day. The Ferguson Hotel closed its doors. The Hawaii Hotel became a memory. Guest houses that had sheltered travelers for decades were demolished to make way for parking lots. One by one, the listings in the Green Book disappeared. Not because integration had made them unnecessary, but because urban renewal had made them extinct. The jazz clubs suffered the same fate. The Sunset Terrace, where so many legendary performances had taken place, was torn down. George's bar, where Wes Montgomery had played those immortal late-night sets, became a pile of bricks and then nothing at all. Henri's Cafe Lounge, the Cotton Club, Dee's Paradise Ballroom, all gone. Erased as if they had never existed. By the 1970s, Indiana Avenue was unrecognizable. Where 30 jazz clubs had once lined the street, now there was emptiness. Where families had raised children for generations, now there were parking lots. Where the Attucks Hotel had welcomed weary travelers to a place of dignity and rest, now there was only absence. The Walker Building survived, but barely. By the 1980s, it stood nearly abandoned, a lonely monument to a vanished world. The theater that had premiered films for packed audiences sat dark. The casino ballroom that had shaken with dancers was silent. The building that had symbolized Black achievement now symbolized Black erasure. Some called it progress. The medical campus expanded, providing jobs and health care. The interstate highways connected Indianapolis to the wider world. New development replaced old buildings. From certain angles, it looked like success. But for the people who remembered, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like the destruction of a community, the erasure of a history, the elimination of a world that had provided safety, dignity, and opportunity in a nation that offered none of those things to people of color. The survivors scattered across Indianapolis. They took with them memories of what Indiana Avenue had been. The music that had poured from every doorway, the smell of cooking from the restaurants, the laughter of neighbors gathered on front porches, the pride of walking down a street where everything you saw had been built by people who looked like you. They remembered the Attucks Hotel, the clean rooms, the respectful service, the sense of arriving somewhere that wanted you. They remembered checking in after long drives through hostile territory, the relief of finally being somewhere safe. They remembered celebrating weddings in the ballroom and closing business deals in the restaurant. They remembered everything that was lost. The children who had grown up on Indiana Avenue became the elders who bore witness. They told their grandchildren stories of a place that no longer existed, a neighborhood erased, a community displaced, a hotel where legends had slept, now nothing but a fading photograph in someone's album. Today, if you walk where Indiana Avenue once thrived, you will find a very different landscape. The IUPUI campus sprawls across land where families once lived. Modern buildings occupy space where jazz clubs once stood. Historic markers dot the sidewalks, small plaques attempting to contain vast histories in a few paragraphs of text. The Walker Building still stands, restored and renamed the Madam Walker Legacy Center. It hosts events and performances, keeping alive some thread of what Indiana Avenue represented. But it stands alone, a survivor without its community, a queen without her kingdom. Everything else is gone. The Attucks Hotel, the jazz clubs, the barbershops and beauty parlors, the guest houses that had sheltered travelers in the dark years of segregation, the businesses that had proven Black enterprise could thrive, the homes that had anchored families for generations, all erased in the name of progress. What remains is memory, and memory, for all its power, cannot bring back what was lost. It cannot rebuild the hotels or reopen the jazz clubs. It cannot restore the community that was scattered to the winds. It can only remind us of what once existed and what was taken away. The story of the Attucks Hotel is the story of Black America in the 20th century. It is a story of building something from nothing, of creating beauty in the face of ugliness, of maintaining dignity when the world offered only degradation. It is a story of triumph against impossible odds, but it is also a story of loss, of communities erased in the name of progress, of histories bulldozed to make way for parking lots, of achievements forgotten because the buildings that housed them no longer stand. The Attucks Hotel was more than a place to sleep. It was proof that Black Americans could build their own institutions, could serve their own community, could create spaces of excellence and dignity in a world designed to deny them both. When that proof was demolished, something irreplaceable was lost. And in Indianapolis, on the corner where Indiana Avenue meets the ghosts of a forgotten empire, that loss still echoes. The jazz has faded. The dancers have departed. The hotel has vanished. But if you listen closely, you might still hear them. The travelers arriving after dark, weary but hopeful. The staff welcoming them home. The music drifting from the clubs down the street. The laughter of a community that had built something magnificent. The laughter of a community that had built something magnificent. That laughter echoes still, if you know how to listen. And there are those who have dedicated their lives to making sure the world never forgets the sound. In the decades since Indiana Avenue was dismantled, a quiet army of historians, preservationists, and community members has fought to keep its memory alive. They have gathered photographs from family albums, recorded oral histories from the last survivors, pieced together the story of what was lost from fragments scattered across attics and archives. Their work is an act of love and an act of resistance, an insistence that erasure will not have the final word. The Crispus Attucks Museum, housed within the Crispus Attucks Medical Magnet High School, has become a sanctuary for this memory. The school itself carries the same name as the hotel that once welcomed travelers to Indiana Avenue. Both were named for the same man, the Black revolutionary who gave his life in the first moments of American independence. The museum's galleries tell the story of Black Indianapolis from its earliest days. African art and textiles line the walls. Exhibits trace the journey from slavery through segregation to the present. And always, the spirit of Indiana Avenue pulses through every display. The museum's collection includes treasures that cannot be measured in dollars. Photographs of jazz musicians mid-performance, sweat glistening under stage lights, programs from events held at the Walker Theater, menus from restaurants that served soul food to hungry travelers. Each artifact is a piece of a world that no longer exists. Each one proves that the Attucks Hotel and its sister institutions were real, that they mattered, that they deserved to be remembered. Gilbert Taylor, who founded the museum in 1998, understood the urgency of preservation. He spent 8 years assembling the initial collection, working with limited resources and unlimited determination. The museum began in a space barely larger than a closet, a humble start for what would become one of the premier African American history museums in the Midwest. Taylor knew that every year brought the loss of more witnesses. Every year, the people who had walked Indiana Avenue in its glory days grew fewer. The stories had to be captured before they disappeared forever. Those stories reveal the human dimension behind the history. They tell of bellhops at the Attucks Hotel who took pride in their uniforms, who carried luggage with a dignity that countered every indignity the wider world inflicted. They tell of cooks in the hotel kitchen who seasoned their dishes with love and memory, recreating the flavors of Southern homes for travelers far from their origins. They tell of desk clerks who greeted every guest as family, because in a sense they were. Everyone who walked through those doors shared a common experience of exclusion, and that shared experience created bonds that transcended the transactional. Oral histories collected over the years paint vivid pictures. An elderly woman remembers being a child, watching her mother get dressed for a night at the Walker Theater, the careful application of makeup, the selection of just the right dress, the anticipation of an evening of glamour and music. A retired musician recalls his first professional gig on Indiana Avenue, the terror and exhilaration of stepping onto a stage where legends had performed, the moment when the music took over and fear dissolved into flow. A former hotel worker describes the satisfaction of preparing a room for a famous guest. The knowledge that this person who commanded stages across America would sleep in a bed he had made. These memories carry weight because they capture something statistics cannot measure: the emotional texture of daily life in a community that had created its own world. the pride of ownership and accomplishment, the warmth of belonging, the bittersweet knowledge that this world existed precisely because the larger world had rejected those who built it. The destruction of Indiana Avenue was not unique to Indianapolis. Across America, black neighborhoods suffered the same fate during the urban renewal era. Bronzeville in Chicago, Paradise Valley in Detroit, the Fillmore in San Francisco, Haiti in Durham, Sugar Hill in Harlem, the Hill District in Pittsburgh, Central Avenue in Los Angeles. Each city had its version of the same story. Thriving black communities marked as blight, bulldozed for highways and hospitals and universities, their residents scattered to the winds. The pattern was so consistent, so widespread, so devastating that it cannot be understood as coincidence or accident. It was policy. It was choice. It was the deliberate decision to build progress on the backs of those least able to resist. Historians have a term for this pattern: Negro removal. It captures the bitter truth that urban renewal disproportionately targeted black communities, that the highways and institutions built on their ruins served primarily white populations, that progress for some meant destruction for others. The Federal Housing Administration and the Federal Highway Administration provided the funding. Local politicians provided the political cover, and black Americans provided the sacrifice, whether they wanted to or not. The numbers in Indianapolis alone tell the story. In the 1950s and 60s, urban renewal projects directed by the Indianapolis Redevelopment Commission displaced thousands of black residents. 104 homes cleared in one project. 18 acres of neighborhood erased in another. The land was sold to Indiana University for its expanding medical campus. The people were told to find somewhere else to live. Some found new homes in other Indianapolis neighborhoods. Some left the city entirely. But wherever they went, they carried with them the trauma of displacement. The experience of watching your neighborhood demolished around you, of being told your community was blight that needed to be cleared, of losing not just a home, but an entire world. That trauma echoed through generations. It echoes still. The physical erasure was compounded by historical erasure. For decades, the story of Indiana Avenue was barely told. The official narrative of Indianapolis history focused on other things: the speedway, the monuments, the downtown development, the black community that had built a Harlem of the Midwest. Largely forgotten. The hotels and jazz clubs and businesses that had thrived, reduced to footnotes, if mentioned at all. This historical amnesia was not accidental. It served the interests of those who had benefited from urban renewal. It allowed the city to celebrate progress without reckoning with its costs. It permitted the institutions built on cleared land to exist without acknowledging what had been destroyed to make room for them. Forgetting was a form of absolution, and for decades that absolution went largely unchallenged. The arc of memory is long, but it bends toward truth. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the silences that had surrounded Indiana Avenue began to break. New generations of scholars and activists started asking questions that their predecessors had avoided. What was here before the campus? What happened to the people who lived here? Where did they go? And what did they lose? These questions opened wounds that had never fully healed, but they also opened possibilities for healing that silence had foreclosed. But memory resists forgetting. In families throughout Indianapolis and beyond, the stories of Indiana Avenue persisted. Grandparents told grandchildren about the nights at the Sunset Terrace. Parents showed children faded photographs of relatives standing in front of the Attucks Hotel. Church services included prayers for the old neighborhood, for the buildings that had sheltered the congregation before the current sanctuary was built on the remains of what came before. This family memory became the foundation for a broader reclamation. In the 1970s and 80s, as the first generation of scholars who had experienced Indiana Avenue began reaching positions of influence, they started writing the histories that had been neglected. They interviewed survivors, excavated archives, published books and articles that documented what had existed and what had been lost. The Walker Building, which had come within a breath of demolition, became a symbol of this reclamation. In 1979, a group of concerned citizens formed the Madam Walker Urban Life Center to save the historic structure. They lobbied for its inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places, achieved in 1980. They raised funds for restoration, drawing support from the Lilly Endowment and the federal government. By 1988, the restored building reopened as a cultural center and performance venue. The restoration was both triumph and tragedy. Triumph because this magnificent example of African Art Deco architecture had been saved, because the Walker Theater would again host performances, because at least one physical reminder of Indiana Avenue's glory days would survive. Tragedy because it survived alone, the neighborhood that had given the Walker Building its context, the jazz clubs and hotels and homes that had surrounded it. Those were gone forever. The Queen had been saved, but her kingdom had been demolished. Today, the Madam Walker Legacy Center, as it is now known, continues the mission of preservation and education. The 1,500-seat theater hosts concerts and plays and community events. The casino ballroom welcomes gatherings as it did in the 1930s and 40s. Meeting rooms and conference spaces serve organizations working on the issues that mattered to Indiana Avenue's residents then and matter to their descendants now. A partnership with Indiana University, the same institution whose expansion contributed to the neighborhood's destruction, now helps fund the center's operations. History twists in strange directions. Walking through the Walker Legacy Center today, you encounter layers of history in every corner. The African-inspired sphinxes still guard the stage, their silent watch spanning nearly a century now. The geometric patterns of the Art Deco design still catch the light in ways that seem almost alive. The building speaks of ambition and achievement, of a community that refused to accept second-class status, of a woman who built an empire from nothing and left behind a monument that outlasted almost everything else on the avenue. But the Walker Building also speaks of loneliness. It stands now without the neighborhood that once embraced it. The jazz clubs that once surrounded it are parking lots. The hotels that once housed its visitors are memories. The businesses that once lined the streets are entries in history books rather than functioning enterprises. The building survived, but survival is not the same as victory. The Queen still reigns, but over a kingdom of ghosts. The musicians who made Indiana Avenue legendary have mostly passed now. Wes Montgomery died in 1968, his guitar forever silenced, but his recordings still teaching new generations what jazz could be. J.J. Johnson died in 2001, having revolutionized the trombone and inspired countless musicians who never walked Indiana Avenue but inherited its spirit. Freddie Hubbard passed in 2008, his trumpet finally quiet after decades of soaring performances. The Hampton Sisters, David Baker, Jimmy Coe, Errol Grandy, all the names that once lit up the Avenue's marquees have joined the ancestors. Their music lives on, but the places where they made that music are gone. The hotel workers have passed too, for the most part. The bellhops who carried luggage with pride. The cooks who seasoned their dishes with memory. The desk clerks who welcomed every guest as family. The maids who turned down beds and left chocolates on pillows and took satisfaction in creating spaces of comfort for travelers far from home. These were the people who made the Attucks Hotel function day to day, whose names never appeared in newspapers or history books, whose contributions were essential but invisible. They deserve remembering too. The guests who passed through the hotel's doors came from every walk of Black American life. Famous entertainers headlining at the Avenue's jazz clubs, athletes competing in the city or passing through to the next game, businessmen attending conventions that white hotels would not welcome, families on vacation, seeking a few days of rest in a place that would treat them with dignity, soldiers in uniform, serving a country that did not always serve them. Each guest brought a story, and each story added to the tapestry of what the Attucks Hotel meant. Some of those stories have survived in the memories of descendants. A grandmother who stayed at the hotel on her honeymoon, who described the way her new husband had splurged on the best room they could afford, how they had danced in the ballroom and eaten breakfast in the restaurant, and felt for those few days like the exclusions of the outside world could not touch them. A grandfather who had stopped at the hotel while driving north during the Great Migration, exhausted from hours of navigating sundown towns, who wept with relief when the desk clerk handed him a room key and welcomed him to Indiana Avenue. These stories are precious beyond measure because they capture what no photograph can show: the emotional reality of finding sanctuary in a hostile world. The question of what we owe to erased communities has no easy answer. Acknowledgement is a start, but cannot rebuild what was lost. Historical markers dot the sidewalks of what was once Indiana Avenue, small plaques that note what stood where. But a plaque is not a building. A plaque cannot shelter travelers or host jazz performances or employ members of the community. It can only tell passers-by that something important once existed here, something that was taken away. Some have called for reparative measures, recognition that urban renewal constituted a form of taking, that the communities displaced deserve compensation or restoration. These calls have gained new urgency in recent years, as the conversation about racial justice has expanded to include economic justice, as cities across America have begun reckoning with the damage inflicted by mid-century planning decisions. Indianapolis has taken modest steps, designating Indiana Avenue as one of 6 cultural districts, investing in programming that honors the area's heritage. Whether these steps are adequate remains a matter of debate. The Attucks Hotel itself exists now only in memory and in the few photographs that have survived. No historical marker identifies its precise location. No plaque commemorates the travelers who found shelter there. The hotel rose from the aspirations of a community determined to provide for itself, and it fell when that community was scattered. Its story is preserved in oral histories and museum exhibits and the recollections of those who remember. But the building itself is gone, replaced by whatever now occupies that corner of earth, its very location uncertain to all but the oldest survivors. What lessons does this vanished hotel offer to the present? Perhaps the most important is that progress is not neutral, that what benefits some often harms others, that the magnificent campus buildings and convenient highways built on the ruins of black neighborhoods came at a cost that was paid by those least able to afford it. Urban renewal was not simply planning, it was a choice about whose communities mattered and whose could be sacrificed. Another lesson concerns the fragility of achievement. The black entrepreneurs and community members who built Indiana Avenue had accomplished something remarkable. Against systemic exclusion from capital and commerce, they had created a thriving business district. Against legal segregation, they had built spaces of dignity and excellence. Their achievement proved that Black Americans could build institutions equal to any in the nation. And then that achievement was demolished in a matter of years. The lesson is not that building was futile, but that what is built must be protected. That achievement without power remains vulnerable. The final lesson may be about memory itself. The forces that erased Indiana Avenue also tried to erase its history, but they failed. Decades later, the story of the Attucks Hotel and its sister institutions is being told more widely than ever. Museums preserve the artifacts. Scholars document the history. Descendants share the stories passed down through generations. Erasure, it turns out, is harder than it looks. You can demolish buildings, but you cannot demolish memory. You can scatter a community, but you cannot scatter the truth of what that community accomplished. And so the Attucks Hotel lives on, not in brick and mortar, but in something more enduring. In the photographs that show well-dressed travelers ascending its front steps. In the oral histories that describe the smell of its kitchen and the warmth of its welcome. in the pride that descendants take in knowing that their ancestors built something magnificent, something that served a need the larger society refused to meet, something that provided dignity in a world designed to deny it. In the ongoing work of museums and cultural centers that refuse to let the story be forgotten, in the scholars and writers and filmmakers who continue documenting what was lost, in every conversation where an elder tells a younger person what Indiana Avenue was like in the days when the music never stopped and the community never doubted its own worth. The preservation of this memory is itself an act of resistance against the forces that erased the neighborhood, against the amnesia that followed the bulldozers, against the comfortable forgetting that allows progress to proceed without accountability. Every time someone tells the story of the Attucks Hotel, they push back against erasure. Every time a museum displays an artifact from Indiana Avenue, they insist that this history matters. Every time a descendant shares a family memory, they keep alive something that powerful forces tried to kill. The ghosts of Indiana Avenue are not silent. They speak through every exhibit at the Crispus Attucks Museum. They sing through the performances at the Walker Legacy Center. They whisper in the memories shared at family gatherings, the stories told to children who will tell them to their own children in turn. The Attucks Hotel is gone, but its spirit endures. Stand today where Indiana Avenue once thrived. The landscape has changed beyond recognition. University buildings rise where homes once stood. Parking lots cover the ground where jazz clubs once shook with music. Modern development has erased nearly every physical trace of what existed before. But beneath that modern surface, the history remains. The ground itself holds the memory of what was built there, what was lived there, what was lost there. Close your eyes. Listen. The saxophone still wails at 2 a.m. if you know how to hear it. The laughter still spills from doorways that exist now only in photographs. The travelers still arrive after dark, weary from driving through hostile territory, and they still find welcome at the Attucks Hotel. In memory, the hotel never closed. In memory, Indiana Avenue never fell. In memory, the community that built something magnificent from nothing continues building still. This is the dark story of the Attucks Hotel, but it is not only dark. It is also a story of light. The light of jazz performances that inspired generations. The light of entrepreneurs who refused to accept the limitations placed upon them. The light of community members who opened their homes to strangers because they understood what strangers faced. The light of preservation efforts that saved what could be saved and documented what could not. The light of memory itself, burning against the darkness of forgetting. Indiana's lost palace for Black America was never just a hotel. It was a declaration. A declaration that Black Americans deserved the same dignity as anyone else, that they could build their own institutions when others refused to serve them, that they would not be denied. The palace fell, but the declaration endures. And in that endurance, there is something stronger than brick and mortar. Something that cannot be bulldozed or erased. The Attucks Hotel stands forever in the hearts of those who remember. And as long as those hearts keep beating, as long as the stories keep being told, as long as the museums preserve the artifacts and the scholars document the history and the descendants honor the legacy, the hotel will never truly be gone. It will live on, a testament to what was built, a memorial to what was lost, and a reminder of what must never be forgotten. In Indianapolis, on the corner where Indiana Avenue meets eternity, the Attucks Hotel welcomes travelers still. They have been driving for hours through a difficult world, and they are tired. But when they walk through those doors, they find what they have been searching for all along. A place that wants them. A place that was built for them. A place called home. The story ends, but the memory continues. The jazz plays on, and somewhere in Indianapolis, In a corner of the city where the past and present intersect, the Attucks Hotel still stands in the imagination of everyone who has ever heard its story. It stands as a reminder of what was possible when a community believed in itself. It stands as a warning about what can be lost when that community is not protected. And it stands as a promise that memory, faithfully kept and persistently shared, can outlast even the most determined efforts at erasure. The dark story of the Attucks Hotel is also, in the end, a story of light that refuses to be extinguished. The light of human dignity, the light of community resilience, the light of memory burning across generations. That light still shines on Indiana Avenue, even if you need the eyes of history to see it. And as long as someone keeps telling this story, that light will never go out. The travelers are still arriving. The hotel is still waiting. Welcome home.